a fire hose of sights and sounds and feels and smells, right? And so the question then is not so much, um, what to do with it, as opposed to how do you narrow it down in such a way that that you find the wheat among the chaff, that you can actually get material that you can use. And for me, there are a couple of um, methods of finding things in the environment that are useful to me as a writer. Now, backing up a little bit, these are specific things that, specific principles that I use um, that are particularly helpful when one writes humor. Excuse me. Because to a large extent, what humor does, and we will be talking more about this in the panel on humor, I believe, on Sunday. The way humor works is that it's constantly got to be catching the reader by surprise, lead them down one path, and then take them in a completely different direction. And so, as you might expect, when I'm looking in my environment for inspirations, one of the things that is very important to me is to look for what stands out, look for what's unusual. And of course, the first question I ask myself is, why is that the way it is? And the truth of the matter is, you don't actually have to answer that in a way that will explain why it is in real life, right? Because this is not about journaling. This is not about writing about nonfiction, right? The important thing is that you start to be thinking about, oh, that's different. Why is that different? And how can I use that in a story? And again, I mean, because of the nature of humor, that element of difference and that element of surprise is very important to me as a humor writer. But I think it's also very useful to any writer, because you want to be hopefully doing something, writing something unique, writing something new, writing something original. And so you should always be looking for the different that's in your environment. I should also say just about that in terms of the story I told about the Dragon of the Bagel, that was at a plot level. But of course, stories are much more than plot. So you should, for instance, be listening to the way people speak. And if somebody has a particular idiom or a particular way of speaking that strikes you as original and interesting, you should incorporate that as well into your writing. It might just be a visual. There is a dead tree in this lovely copse of trees. Why is that? What does that image say? And how can you incorporate that image into a story? So, you should constantly be looking at all levels of your environment, at anything in your environment, because you never know what exactly it will be that will inspire that next image or piece of dialogue or piece of story. The other thing, another thing that I would strongly suggest is that you be a 3-year-old. And what I mean by that, and those of you who are parents will probably recognize this, always be asking, why? Why is this? And in this case, it doesn't have to be something that stands out. It can be anything in your environment. It can be anything that somebody says to you. The question there is, not only can you start thinking about what's unusual, but you can also start, and you should also start thinking about what we take for granted, right? Why does the drain go in a clockwise direction in part of the world and a counterclockwise direction in another part of the world? Something we don't even think about. What is the name of that little bit under our nose, between our nose and, well, my mustache, your mouth, whatever? Why is it called that? Where did that come from? Why does Zoom work the way it works? I mean, everything can and should be questioned, particularly, I mean, in a science fictional setting, the questions should always be about technology. Why does technology privilege certain people over other people? Why does technology privilege certain experiences over other experiences? Um, there are constant sort of things that we take for granted are in our environment that might, if you start questioning them, um, uh, might lead to some inspiration. And again, it might be at the story level, but it also might be at the character level. It might be in terms of dialogue or other description or other aspects of writing. And if you're going to do that, I mean, the reason I mentioned the 3-year-olds is because you should not stop with the first answer, right? Why is Zoom like this? Well, the people who produced it believed that this would be the best thing. Well, why did they believe it would be the best way of doing these meetings? Are there other ways of doing meetings that could be better? Are there other ways of using this technology? Who are the people? Okay, it's not a why question. I'm kind of branching out into the 5 W's here. Who are the people who are disadvantaged, who cannot access Zoom or whatever technology you're happening to feature in your story? And what can you extrapolate from the answers you get to your why questions that you can use in a science fiction setting, right? So those are a couple of things we can certainly, if people have other ideas for how to approach the pre-work, the work that we all have to do. I would strongly suggest, and I'm sure I'm not the first person who will be telling you this, always have writing utensils, whether it's a notepad in your phone, or I prefer pen and paper, so I always have pen and paper with me, because if you start seeing the world through the eyes of an artist, if you start seeing the world as your raw material, if you start seeing the world as a potential for ideas, a potential generator for ideas, they're going to come at you 24/7, right? They're going to come at you all the time. One of the things that happened to me when I was younger, I would not, when I was meeting people for the first time, identify myself as a writer. I thought it was kind of like a psychologist. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this syndrome, but what happens with psychologists is that they don't want to tell people they don't know that they're psychologists, because they're afraid that that people will think, oh, that I have to be careful what I say around this person, because they might be analyzing every word that I say, right? And I had a similar sort of experience where I was afraid that, people would be afraid to be themselves around me, because they were afraid that that I would take something brilliant that they said or did, or something that happened to them, and turn it into a story, right? And I, didn't want barriers between myself and other people. But then a few years later, I would have been in my early 30s, I think. I had a friend of mine, and this is an involved story, and I won't go into it in detail as much as I love this story. But I had a friend of mine who had an experience, and we talked about it. It was very upsetting, very personally traumatic for her. And we talked about it. And it was kind of inspirational for me for a piece of writing. And I asked her if she wouldn't mind if I used it. And her response was, "Well, I've always wanted to be a character in one of your stories, but I didn't know how to ask you." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So now when I meet people, what I usually tell them is, you know, no guarantees. If you say something or do something, I may use it. But to try and kind of ease that sort of blow, one of the things that I do clarify for them is that very little gets into a piece of writing wholesale, right? Um, you'll take a trait from this person, a trait from that person, a trait from a character you've seen in a TV series that you particularly like. You'll take a way of speaking from a fourth person and a particular idiom from a fifth person. By the time you create your fictional character, most people will not recognize themselves in it. They will not see themselves in it. That's not the way usually the creative process works. And that seems to have worked. That seems to be okay for most people I know. I don't seem to have a problem with those kind of barriers in in my personal relationships. In any case, um, I'm going to suggest a couple of exercises for people. Um, these are just things that can help you develop the habit of paying attention to your environment, develop the habit of being a creative person, being a writer, which I think is very important. The first thing I think that anybody who wants to write for any medium should do is tape record a conversation, tape record several conversations if you can with different people. Um, and one of the things you're going to find is that nobody in fiction speaks like real people speak. And part of the reason for that, the main reason I think for that, is because nobody speaks in even the broken up kind of sentences that most characters speak in. But I mean, lots of fictional characters speak in complete sentences, right? And very, very few people actually speak that way. It's broken up. They lose their train of thought. They get interrupted. See how people interact in conversational settings, and you'll find that that is very different from the way that people actually people speak in the media. And there is, in fact, a really, really important reason for this, because we can't have our scenes go on for 20 pages when we need people to get information out, right? Especially if you're writing a short story. But even if you're writing a novel, those kind of scenes are deadly, right? So one of the things that that is important when you're writing dialogue, very important to keep in mind, is that dialogue is always stylized speech. It is never direct speech, or is rarely direct speech as people actually say it. And I mean, I point out to people that this is true of people who a lot of people, writers who a lot of people think are really naturalistic writers, right? I think, for instance, of David Mamet. Great dialogue. I love his writing. I love the rhythm of it and the flow of it. He is a great writer, but he is not a naturalistic writer. People don't write with the rhythms that he writes with, or people don't speak, rather, with the rhythms that he writes with. Yes, David Mamet, people don't speak that way. So, I mean, partially it's important because it will definitely help your writing dialogue, because you'll have to learn how to take out all of the extraneous bits and leave the important stuff in your dialogue. The other thing, and this is a game, but it's actually a fun game, and it's a really useful game. Go to a public place. Go to a place where people are talking People are, there are a lot of people around you. People don't have to be talking, but there are a lot of people around you. And there are a couple of variations of this. Try to imagine from the expression on the person's face or their physical gestures, try to imagine what they're thinking, right? And again, the point of this exercise is not to get their thinking correct. The point of the exercise is to start thinking yourself about how people's thoughts are expressed in their physicality, right? But then another variation on this particular exercise is try to give them a story. What brought that person to this space, this place? Where is that person going? When they move through this space, what kind of a story do they have to tell? And again, you will almost undoubtedly be incorrect, but this is a way for you to start imagining narratives for yourself. I'm going to stop myself there. If people have any questions, I'm going to give about 10 minutes for questions. Then I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to cut this short. Does anybody have any questions? You can either type them into the group chat, or you can unmute yourself and just ask away. I will say that earlier in my life, earlier in my career, when I was doing a lot of thinking about developing my own voice and developing my own sort of approach to writing, I did read a lot of books on the writing process, a lot of screenwriting books, because I was a screenwriting geek before I was a prose geek. But one of the things I noticed was that they touched upon a lot of different elements of craft, but there weren't a lot of books that dealt with the inspiration, right? Where do the ideas come from? How do you develop the ideas so that you have something to work your craft on? And to me, that was a terrible, terrible hole in the writer's education, right? Because, and I have seen this now, one of my other hats, not only am I a writer, but I'm also the editor of Amazing Stories magazine. And so I read a lot of short stories. I've read a lot of short stories over the past couple of years. And one of the things that has made very clear to me is that you can be a brilliant craftsperson and have absolutely nothing original to say, and no original way to say it. And one of the surest ways of getting rejected by me is to not have an original voice. If you're writing something that a dozen other people could have written just as well, it's not going to interest me, no matter what level your craft is. I'm making a pitch here for voice. I'm making a pitch here for originality. And that's not sort of this discussion, but it's really important, if you want to stand out from the thousands of other people who are submitting short stories to magazines. Very important that you do have something original to say, and an original way, your own unique way of saying it, your own unique voice. So rant off. Again, any questions, any comments, any thoughts that people have on the process? I assume that everybody knows to write the ideas down whenever they come, no matter how minor. I assume you all have, you know, a list of, or a file of inspirations. I actually have multiple files because I in addition to working on novels, I also have different short story collections, series that I'm working on. I also have TV and film productions, and I have an ideas file for every project that I have, which makes the organization of it easier. Um, you know, but it's important. It's useful to have a single file for the inspirations you don't know. What I find happens, and you may agree or disagree, feel free to share your experience on this. But I've always found that creativity feeds creativity. You get to a point in your writing career where once you've gotten going on a project, and this is especially true in novels, for novels, because as I point out, short stories are sprints, but novels are marathons. They just require so much work, and it's very easy to get blocked, right? But I find that creativity feeds on itself. So that once you start generating an idea, that idea leads to another idea. And when you're brainstorming on a specific project, the ideas multiply very, very quickly. I admit that I have never experienced writer's block, as I gather most people have. The worst that'll happen to me is, you know, I'll try for half an hour to work on a scene and it's just not coming. Because I have multiple projects on the go, I will just switch to another project, and 99 times out of 100, I'll be able to do something with that. So I'll be able to contribute to that. A lot of people, or actually when I started writing, I was totally monomaniacal. I could only focus on one project at a time. But I find that having multiple projects on the go means that the creative juices are always flowing. And certainly, you know, the subconscious wheels, because I believe that the subconscious is where all of our great ideas come from. The subconscious wheels are always turning for a variety of different things. But, you know, when I've tried on 2 or 3 different projects and don't seem to be getting anywhere, that's usually the time for research. So I'll go off and start reading. And I have found for myself in my own process that it really, I have never, I've never been away from writing for more than about 2 days. And I find that actually it's really useful to be away from it, because when I come back, the ideas are just there and ready to flow. Okay, I hope that was helpful to you. I am always, I'm easy to find online. I think, I mean, I've obviously been doing this all my life. I love the creative process, and I love helping other people with their creative process. You know, anything, oh, good, I'm glad. I very quickly, the one and only time I was in Los Angeles, I was there because I used to be a contributor to a magazine called Creative Screenwriting, and Creative Screenwriting had a screenwriters expo, so they invited all their writers to come and talk. I gave a 90-minute lecture on humor. Comedy was my thing. And for the first half of that lecture, I was talking about the sorts of things that I was talking about here today. The inspirational things, the things that you need to do to prompt yourself, to prime yourself for the inspiration. And everybody in the room, there were about 50 people in a room that could only hold about 30. It was packed. Everybody in the room gave me blank stares. For the second half of the panel, I talked about the various comic devices and how you could incorporate them into scripts. And yeah, everybody got their pens out and they were scribbling madly, and they had to take it all down. because that's what they wanted to know. And so I often wonder, what the value of these types, the types of information that I think are really important to being an artist are. But I always sort of tell myself that that if people don't get it right away, 5, 10, 15 years from now, they'll be sitting behind their computers and it'll be like, oh yeah, that's what he was talking about. So I hope you all have those oh yeah moments. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming.